Great. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you some more questions. That was the sort of quick fire round, as it were, of this quiz. But this is the chance for a little bit more reflection on your voyage. As I said at the start, I'm hugely full of admiration for anybody who does a solo voyage like that. If we look right back, Jez, what inspired you to do this in the first place? I mean, was there any particular time when you reckon, oh yeah, that was the moment when I suddenly decided to
Yes,
take on the
at
challenge?
some point, maybe 2015, I started following a blog, which later became a YouTube channel, but at that time it was a blog by Dylan Winter called Keep Turning Left. And he was making his way anti-clockwise around the UK, and every season exploring a new area like the East Coast rivers or uh, East Coast of Yorkshire and so on. And he sort of got me inspired on or excited about the idea of doing a circumnavigation. And then there's another chap, Roger Taylor, who did a lot of very adventurous sailing in the Arctic in a Corribee originally called Ming Ming,
Ah.
and he just showed what you could do in a small boat if it was well prepared for the trip.
So where did that lead then? What sort of preparation and training did you do?
Well, I haven't done any of the coastal skipper type courses and so on, but so I decided to sign up for an online. In fact, somehow I sneaked my way onto the Yachtmaster course rather cheekily, and I think they've spotted halfway through that I wasn't quite keeping up and asked me if I'd done the coastal skipper before. But I did that. It was quite hard to keep up with the work. It's quite intensive, the theory stuff that you have to do for that. But I did most of it, but I didn't get as far as taking the exam. But I did learn a lot about navigation and calculations and things from that.
And that's the theory, isn't
That's the
it? What about
theory.
practice? You've done lots of small boat
Done
sailing,
lots
haven't
of
you?
small boat
So
sailing and a few weeks here and there of yachts of larger boat sailing on friends' boats and on a Greece flotilla holiday.
yeah, it's still quite a leap, isn't it, to go to sailing around Britain?
It is quite a leap, but I guess I'm always someone who's done quite adventurous trips like that, planned them, researched them, and
Yeah.
then carried them out. So
And you did not only meticulous planning, but you did some test voyages, didn't you? So you didn't just embark on it without
yeah,
having tried yourself and the boat.
so I spent quite a long time getting the boat ready in 2020, but didn't manage to do the trip, obviously. But rewiring, fitting a solar system so I could be independent of mains power. Plumbing, almost everything got some sort of renovation. And then in 2020, I did a 1 month trip up the east coast as far as Lindisfarne and back again. And there's a bit of more local sailing in the rivers on the east coast. And then last year, I also did a trip up the Thames estuary from Grimsby, and so I had a good chance to put all my navigation stuff and the boat through its paces.
Yeah, yeah. And you picked a Corribee. Why was that?
I think they're very beautiful boats to look at. They have a lovely shear line.
They do.
They're small, so they're cheaper to buy and cheaper to work on, and they have good pedigree across the Atlantic. They've been into the high Arctic. They have been sailed around the UK before. Probably about 10 Corribees, I think, have gone round. If I can.
Well, didn't Ellen MacArthur sail around
Yes,
Britain?
she did, and lots of people knew that when they met me on the way around. But there were also two 16-year-old lads who did it the same year, but going in opposite
Really?
directions. I don't think they planned it like that, but they did cross over some way on the way round. And
Also in Corribees.
Corribees, yeah,
Now, you're obviously on the boat at the
I
moment,
am.
but you said it was a small boat, and it's not on the ocean, is it?
No, it's
Right
not.
now.
No, it's on a trailer.
Where are you?
I'm in Sheffield, at the top of the drive, sitting on a trailer in the boat. Yeah,
Okay, we might want to imagine you out at sea, but I mean, that just shows how
sway
sort of
around a bit or something.
compact and portable. Yeah, don't do that too much.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you got to the voyage having tested yourself on the boat and done a lot of really impressive sort of fitting of technology and self-steering and that kind of thing, and solar power. Um, what reflecting back on it were the most significant challenges that you faced, both physically and mentally, and how did you kind of steel yourself to overcome those?
It was a fantastic trip, and there were no major catastrophes at all. And one of the things that you have to do, and I'm sure even if you're with a crew, is you have to be very self-disciplined about prioritizing all the boat stuff, the passage preparation, the boat preparation, and all that, and keeping the boat up to scratch and so on. So that's an ongoing sort of discipline that you have to maintain, and it's quite unusual, I think, every day to have that discipline in your life when you're on land. And I did decide to do some long passages just to get some distance under my belt, as it were. Especially at the beginning, I started with 2 24-hour plus passages just to get up into Scotland, and they were tough. And you normally need a day or two to rest afterwards. But I think it's there's inevitable on the trip you'll have to do some night passages and things just because of the way the tides and the winds are.
Yeah, it was very impressive doing that solo. What kept you going?
What kept me going?
Caffeine, motivation, or just because you're a doctor and you've had been on call at night or something?
Yes, I think I've been planning it for a long time, for several years. So it really was a strong motivation for me to complete it. There were once or twice, I think, on the last sort of third of the trip when I was struggling a bit, but I just knew I had to finish it. And although you had told me that if I felt I should stop, not just push on relentlessly. But I didn't quite reach that state. So yes, I think a lot of caffeine, although the coffee stopped tasting very nice. I think my water tank gives a bad flavour to the coffee or something. And the people you meet along the way, sort of they're quite encouraging of what you're doing, and it's quite fun as you go around just to meet people and catch up with friends or family and things.
Great. Yeah, you made it quite sociable actually, didn't you, even though the sailing was mostly solo?
Yeah.
Were there any sort of unexpected challenges you suddenly had to overcome while you were at sea? I mean, this is by yourself, isn't it? So I'm just trying to imagine how that felt.
Yes, there were mainly sort of mechanical breakage type things that caught me out. Having spent so long preparing the boat, I sort of, part of me assumed it would be fine, but of course it wasn't. So there was one where the wind vane, which has what they call a pendulum, but it looks like a rudder, which pretty much fell off its pintles and was just held on by the arm that the control arm it's attached to. And I just noticed it and rescued it.
This is for the self-steering.
Wind vane self-steering, yeah. So that was a narrow squeak.
You leaned over and rescued it before it went into the drink.
Exactly, yeah.
And you were facing these things alone. How did you deal with being alone?
I actually loved it most of the time. I know I was quite often, when I was thinking something through, I quite often would do it aloud, which was quite surprising. And I've stopped doing that now I'm home, but I would sort of talk myself through my plan a bit, just as I was thinking about it.
And is there anything particularly special then about sailing alone?
It's a sense of independence and the way you have responsibility for the situation and decision making. Surprisingly, when I did have people on board, like my son Tom joined me for 3 nights, I actually was, I got distracted by the usual routine of coming into harbour and stuff. And suddenly at the last minute you think, oh golly, I've got to get the fenders out or something. Whereas normally it was all sort of quite a smooth machine, really.
Yeah, you talked about the dolphins as being a particular highlight. Is that the highlight in your sort of encounters with the natural environment?
I mean, some of the best days were that thing where you're sailing along, maybe in a force 4, and the sea is quite flat, and the boat just gets in a groove, and it just feels like you could go on forever, and you're making good time. That feeling is it just carries you along for hours somehow. It's such a good feeling that the boat's set up and just sailing itself.
Yeah. Any profound or spiritual experiences?
Well, I did. It's quite difficult in the disruptive. So there is a routine on the boat, but it's not like you get up at every same time in the morning. But I did learn some passages of scripture as I was going along by rote, and then use them to pray and meditate as I was sailing some days. That was quite wow. That was special. Yeah.
Yeah. So you wove some spiritual disciplines into the sailing disciplines.
Yeah.
I do know about the sailing disciplines. I mean, I know when Anne and I sailed around Britain, I think we must have spent about 2 hours each night planning the next day. It was a
Yes.
lot to do when you're taking everything into account, in unfamiliar places particularly.
Every day you're pretty much going into a harbour you don't know, or an anchorage you don't know. So you're starting from scratch almost every day, aren't you, with the exit and the entry
Yeah.
and all the tides.
You seem very good at asking other people for advice, which I think is wise, getting a bit
Yes.
of local knowledge.
Often the local knowledge is makes it sound less challenging than what the pilot books tell you. They try to put the fear of God into you on every overfalls and whatever, but the local knowledge was quite encouraging in that respect.
And just looking back then, do you feel that having achieved this challenge and done that solo voyage, has it changed your perspective on yourself in any way?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I do sometimes puzzle how, as you alluded to earlier, that I haven't done a lot of big boat sailing, and if Mwera is a big boat, and haven't done a lot of coastal sailing with all the tides and stuff around the UK, and I was sort of bemused in a way about how I managed to get the hang of it. But I suppose I had a couple of seasons to sort of get started with that. So but
I think you worked your way up to it very systematically, and that was impressive.
I think I did wonder whether I would get an idea of whether I would take up some sort of sailing activity as a job after this trip, but that hasn't become clear.
Yep.
Still thinking about that.
Yeah. Has so that was about you. Has the journey given you any reflections or changed your view at all of our country or the world or the natural world?
I think most people, don't experience the coastal life. Obviously, more people probably live inland, but so much of the UK it's been about seafaring, and back in the day there wasn't really a great inland transport system, and it was all by sea. And everywhere you stop, there has been this immense sort of fishing tradition and reliance on coastal transport for life. And
there's amazing infrastructure around
that's
our
there.
coast, isn't there? I mean,
voyage,
much of it been there for 150 years.
The other thing that struck me was, how much I was in Holyhead Marina, and in the museum there's a story about some merchant ship coming out of Liverpool and just being wrecked on the island there, within a few hours of leaving port, just for the lack of a lighthouse, essentially. And most of the lighthouses that you saw had eventually been put up after so many shipwrecks, and without weather for, how come they didn't know there was a force 12 storm that was going to come in? But of course they didn't. They just set out when they were setting out, and then they had to deal with what they found. And there were so many boats wrecked, and you just sort of realise how treacherous it was to be at sea, a couple of centuries ago, compared to now. Yeah.
You talked about your love of challenges. Is there another one on the horizon, or is that too early to say?
Yes, it's a bit early to say, but I obviously missed out Ireland pretty much. I stopped in Belfast Lock for a couple of nights, and I did anchor at Rathlin Island as well. But I did wonder about whether I should go around Ireland, which has its own challenges, particularly on the west coast. There is a thing called the Jester Challenge, and one of the years when that happens, it's a trip from Plymouth to Baltimore on the south coast of Ireland, which is about, this year I think it took them about 6 or 7 days because there were very light winds. But that's something I would like to do.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. Well, fair winds to you, Jez.
Thanks. Really nice chatting.